Don Carlos Castaneda's The Second Ring of Power, Chapter 2, The Little Sisters, Part 2. It was time to adopt a new course of action. Lydia had said that I could help Rosa and Donna Soledad with the same force that had caused them injury. The problem, therefore, was to get the right sequence of feelings or thoughts or whatever that led my body to unleash that force. I took Rosa's hand and rubbed it. I willed it to be cured. I had only the best feelings for her. I caressed her hand and hugged her for a long time. I rubbed her head and she fell asleep on my shoulder, but there was no change in the redness or the swelling. Lydia watched me without saying a word. She smiled at me. I wanted to tell her that I was a fiasco as a healer. Her eyes seemed to catch my mood, and they held it until it froze. Rosa wanted to sleep. She was either dead tired or ill. I did not want to find out which. I picked her up in my arms. She was lighter than I would have imagined. I took her to Don Juan's bed and gently placed her on it. Lydia covered her. The room was very dark. I looked out the window and saw the cloudless sky filled with stars. Up to that moment, I had been oblivious to the fact that we were at a very high altitude. As I looked at the sky, I felt a surge of optimism. Somehow the stars looked festive to me. The southeast was indeed a lovely direction to face. I had a sudden urge that I felt obliged to satisfy. I wanted to see how different the view of the sky was from Donna Soledad's window, which faced the north. I took Lydia by the hand with the intention of leading her there, but a ticklish sensation on the top of my head stopped me. It went like a ripple down my back to my waist, and from there it went to the pit of my stomach. I sat down on the mat. I made an effort to think about my feelings. It seemed at that very moment I had felt the tickling on my head. My thoughts had diminished in strength and number. I tried, but I could not involve myself in the usual mental process that I called thinking. My mental deliberation made me feel oblivious to Lydia. She had knelt on the floor facing me. I became aware that her enormous eyes were scrutinizing me from a few inches away. I automatically took her hand again and walked to Donna Soledad's room. As we reached the door, I felt her whole body stiffen. I had to pull her. I was about to cross the threshold when I caught sight of a bulky, dark mass of a human body huddled against the wall opposite the door. The sight was so unexpected that I gasped and let go of Lydia's hand. It was Donna Soledad. She was resting her head against the wall. I turned to Lydia. She had recoiled a couple of steps. I waited to whisper that Donna Soledad had returned, but there were no sounds to my words, although I was sure I had vocalized them. I would have tried to talk again, had it not been I had an urge to act. It was as if words took too much time, and I had very little of it. I stepped into the room and walked over to Donna Soledad. She appeared to be in great pain. I squatted by her, and rather than asking her anything, I lifted her face to look at her. I saw something on her forehead. It looked like a plaster of leaves that she had made for herself. It was dark, vicious to the touch. I felt the imperative need to peel it off her forehead. In a very bold fashion, I grabbed her head, tilted it back, and yanked the plaster off. It was like peeling off rubber. She did not move or complain about pain. Underneath the plaster there was a yellowish-green blotch. It moved as if it were alive or imbued with energy. I looked at it for a moment, unable to do anything. I poked at it with my finger, and it stuck to it like glue. I did not panic as I ordinarily would have. I rather liked the stuff. I stirred it with the tips of my fingers, and all of it came off her forehead. I stood up. The gooey substance felt warm. It was like a sticky paste for an instant, and then it dried. It was like a sticky paste for an instant, and then it dried up between my fingers and on the palm of my hand. I then felt another jolt of apprehension and ran to Don Juan's room. I grabbed Rose's arm and wiped the same fluorescent yellowish-green stuff from her hand that I had wiped from Donna Soledad's forehead. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hardly stand on my feet. I wanted to lie down, but something in me pushed me to the window and made me jog on the spot. I cannot recall how long I jogged there. Suddenly I felt that someone was wiping my neck and shoulders, and I became aware then that I was practically nude, perspiring profusely. Lydia had a cloth around my shoulders and was wiping the sweat off my face. My normal thought process came back to me all at once. I looked around the room. Rosa was sound asleep. I ran to Donna Soledad's room. I expected to find her also asleep, but there was no one there. Lydia had trailed behind me. I told her what had happened. She returned to Rosa and woke her up while I put on my clothes. Rosa did not want to wake up. Lydia grabbed her injured hand and squeezed it. In one single springing movement, Rosa stood up and was fully awake. They began to rush around the house, turning off lanterns. They seemed to be getting ready for to run away. I wanted to ask them why they were in such a hurry when I realized that I had dressed in a great hurry myself. We were rushing together. Not only that, but they seemed to be waiting for direct commands from me. We ran out of the house carrying all the packages I had brought. Lydia had advised me not to leave any of them behind. I had not yet assigned them, and they still belonged to me. I threw them in the backseat of the car while the two girls crammed into the front. I started the car and backed out slowly, finding my way in the darkness. Once we were on the road, I was brought face to face with the most pressing issue. Both of them had said in unison that I was the leader. Their actions were dependent on my decisions. I was the narwhal. We could not just run out of the house and drive away aimlessly. I had to guide them. But the truth was that I had no idea where to go or what to do. I turned casually to look at them. The headlights cast a glare inside the car, and their eyes were like mirrors that reflected it. I remember that Don Juan's eyes did the same. They seemed to reflect more light than the eyes of an average person. I knew that the two girls were aware of my impasse. Rather than making a joke about it in order to cover up my incapacity, I bluntly put the responsibility of a solution in their laps. I said that I lacked practice as a narwhal and would appreciate it if they would oblige me with a suggestion or a hint as to where we should go. They seemed disgusted with me. They clicked their tongues and shook their heads. I mentally shuffled through various courses of action, none of which was feasible, such as driving them to town or taking them to Nesta's house or even taking them to Mexico City. I stopped the car. I was driving toward town. I wanted more than anything else in the world to have a heart-to-heart talk with the girls. I opened my mouth to begin, but they turned away from me, faced each other, and put their arms around each other's shoulders. That appeared to be an indication that they had locked themselves in and were not listening to me. My frustration was enormous. What I craved for at that moment was Don Juan's mastery over any situation at hand, his intellectual companionship, his humor. Instead, I was in the company of two nincompoops. I caught a gesture of dejection in Lydia's face that stopped my avalanche of self-pity. I became overtly aware for the first time that there was no end to our mutual disappointment. Obviously, they too were accustomed, although in a different manner, to the mastery of Don Juan. But then the shift from the narwhal himself to me must have been disastrous. I sat for a long while with the motor running. Then all at once I again had a bodily shiver that started on the top of my head as a ticklish sensation. And I knew then what had happened when I had entered Donna Soledad's room a while before. I had not seen her in an ordinary sense. What I had thought was Donna Soledad, huddled against the wall, was in fact the memory of her leaving her body the instant after I had hit her. I also knew that when I touched her gooey, phosphorus substance I had cured her, and that it was some sort of energy I had left in her head and in Rose's hand with my blows. A vision of a particular ravine went through my mind. I became convinced that Donna Soledad and LaGuardia were there. My knowledge was not a mere conjecture. It was rather a truth that needed no further corroboration. LaGuardia had taken Donna Soledad to the bottom of that particular ravine and was at the precise moment attempting to cure her. I wanted to tell her that it was wrong to treat the swelling in Donna Soledad's forehead and that there was no longer a need for them to stay there. I described my vision to the girls. Both of them told me the way Don Juan used to tell me, not to indulge. With him, however, that reaction was more congruous. I had never really minded his criticisms or scorn, but the two girls were in a different league. I felt insulted. "I'll take you home," I said. "Where do you live?" Lydia turned to me in a most furious tone, said that the both of them were my wards, and that I had to deliver them to safety, since at the request of the Nagal, they had relinquished their freedom to act in order to help me. I had a fit of anger at that point. I wanted to slap the two girls, but then I felt a curious shiver running through my body once more. It started again as a tickling in the top of my head, which went down my back until it reached my umbilical region, and then I knew where they lived. The ticklishness was like a shield, a soft, warm sheet of film. I could sense it physically, covering the area between my pubis and the edge of my rib cage. My wrath disappeared and was replaced by a strange sobriety, an aloofness, at the same time a desire to laugh. I knew then of something transcendental. Under the impact of Donna Soledad and the little sister's action, my body had suspended judgment. I had, in Don Juan's terms, stopped the world. I had amalgamated two disassociated sensations, the ticklishness on the top of my head and the dry cracking sound at the base of my neck. Between them lay the means to that suspension of judgment. As I sat in my car with the two girls on the side of the deserted mountain road, I knew for a fact that for the first time I had had a complete awareness of stopping the world. That feeling brought to my mind the memory of another similar first-time bodily awareness I had had years before. I had to go with the ticklishness. It had to do with the ticklishness on the top of my head. Don Juan said that sorcerers had to cultivate such a sensation, and he described it at great length. According to him, it was a sort of itching, which was neither pleasurable nor painful, and which occurred on the top of everyone's head. In order to make me aware of it on an intellectual level, he described it and analyzed its features, and then, on the practical side, he attempted to guide me into developing the necessary bodily awareness and memory of his feelings by making me run under branches or rocks that protruded on a horizontal plane a few inches above my height. Excuse me. For years I had tried to follow what he was pointing out to me. But on the one hand, I was incapable of understanding what he meant by his description. And on the other hand, I was incapable of providing my body with the adequate memory by following his pragmatic steps. Never did I feel anything on the top of my head as I ran underneath the branches or rocks he had selected for his demonstrations. But one day, my body by itself discovered the sensation while I was driving a high-panel truck into a 3-story parking structure. I entered the gate of the structure at the same speed I usually did in my small 2-door sedan. The result was that from the high seat of the truck, I perceived the transverse cement beam of the roof coming at my head. I could not stop the truck in time, and the feeling I got was that the cement beam was scalping me. I had never driven a motor vehicle with as high as that truck. Thus, I was incapable of making necessary perceptual adjustments. The space between the roof of the truck and the roof of the parking structure seemed non-existent to me. I felt the beam with my scalp. That day, I drove for hours inside the structure, giving my body a chance to store the memory of that ticklish sensation. I faced the two girls and wanted to tell them that I had just found out where they lived. I desisted. There was no way of describing to them that ticklish sensation had made me the ticklish sensation had made me remember a casual remark that Don Juan had once made as we passed the house on our way to Pablito's place. He pointed out an unusual feature in the surroundings and said that house was an ideal place for quietness, but was not a place to rest. I drove them there. Their house was rather big. It was also an adobe structure with a tile roof, like Donna's soul dad's. It had one long room in the front, a roofed open-air kitchen in the back of the house, and a huge patio next to the kitchen, an area for chickens beyond the patio. The most important part of their house, however, was a closed room with two doors, one opening to the front room and the other to the back. Lydia said that they had built it themselves. I wanted to see it, but both of them said it was not appropriate. It was not an appropriate time because Josefina and Lagorda were not present to show me the parts of the room that belonged to them. In the corner of the front room was a sizable built-in brick platform. It was about 18 inches high and had been constructed like a bed with one end against the wall. Lydia put some thick straw mats on its flat top and urged me to lie down and sleep while they watched over me. Rosa had lit a lantern and hung it on a nail above the bed. There was enough light to write. I explained to them that writing eased my tension and asked if it bothered them. "Why do you have to ask?" Lydia retorted. "Just do it." In the vein of a perfunctory explanation, I told them that I had always done some things, such as taking notes, which were strange even to Don Juan and Don Gennaro, and would perforce be strange to them. "We all do strange things," Lydia said dryly. I sat down on the bed under the lantern with my back against the wall. They lay down next to me, one on each side. Rosa covered herself with a blanket and went to sleep as if all she needed to do was to lie down. Lydia said that then was the appropriate time and place for us to talk, although she would prefer that I would turn off the light because it made her sleepy. Our conversation in the darkness centered around the whereabouts of the other two girls. She said that she could not even imagine where Lagorda was, but that Josefina was undoubtedly in the mountains, still looking for Nesta, even though it was dark. She explained that Josefina was the most capable one to take care of herself in the eventualities such as being in a deserted place in the dark. That was the reason why Lagorda had selected her to run that errand. I mentioned that in listening to them talk about Lagorda, I had formed the opinion that she was the boss. Lydia replied that Lagorda was indeed in charge, and that the Narwhal himself had put her in command. She added that even if he had not done so, Lagorda would have taken over, sooner or later, because she was the best. I was compelled at that point to light the lantern in order to write. Lydia complained that the light made it impossible to stay awake, but I prevailed. "What makes Lagorda the best?" I asked. She has more personal power," she said. "She knows everything. Besides, the Narwhal taught her how to control people." "Do you envy Lagorda for being the best?" "I used to, but not now." "Why did you change?" "I finally accept my fate, as the Narwhal told me." "And what is your fate?" My fate is to be the breeze, to be a dreamer. My fate is to be a warrior." Do Josefina and Rosa envy Lagorda?" "No, they don't. All of us have accepted our fate. The narwhal said that power comes only after we accept our fate without recriminations. I used to complain a lot and feel terrible because I liked the narwhal. I thought I was a woman, but he showed me that I was not. He showed me that I was a warrior. My life had ended before I met him. This body that you see here is new. The same thing happened to all of us. Perhaps you were not like us, but to us, the narwhal was a new life. When he told us that he was going to leave because he had to do other things, we thought he would die. But look at us now. We're alive, and do you know why? Because the narwhal showed us that we were himself. He's here with us. He will always be here. We are his body and his spirit. Do all four of you feel the same way? We are not four. We are one. That is our fate. We have to carry each other. And you are the same. All of us are the same. Even Soledad is the same, although she goes in a different direction. And Pablito and Nesta and Benigno, where do they fit? We don't know. We don't like them, especially Pablito. He's a coward. He has not accepted his fate and wants to wriggle out of it. He wants to chuck his chances as a sorcerer and live an ordinary life. That'll be great for Soledad. But the narwhal gave us orders to help him. Excuse me. But the narwhal gave us orders to help him. We are tired of helping him, though. Maybe one of these days Lagorda will push him out of the way forever. Can't she do that? She could do that. Of course she can. She's got more of the narwhal than the rest of us, perhaps even more than you. Why do you think the narwhal never told me that you were his apprentices? Because you're empty. Did he say that I was empty? Everyone knows you're empty. It's written on your body. How can you tell that? There is a hole in the middle of my body where? She very gently touched the spot on the right side of my stomach. She drew a circle with a finger as if she were following the edges of an invisible hole 4 or 5 inches in diameter. Are you empty yourself, Lydia? Are you kidding? I am complete. Can't you see? Her answers to my questions were taking a turn that I had not expected. I did not want to antagonize her with my ignorance. I shook my head affirmatively. Why do you think I have a hole here that makes me empty? I asked her after deliberating what the most innocent question would be. She did not answer. She turned her back to me and complained that the light of the lantern bothered her eyes. I insisted on a response. She faced me defiantly. I don't want to talk to you anymore, she said. You are stupid. Not even Pablito is that stupid, and he's the worst. I did not want to end up in another blind alley by pretending that I knew what she was talking about. So I asked her, again, what caused my emptiness. I coaxed her to talk, giving her ample assurances that Don Juan had never explained that topic to me. He had said time and time again that I was empty, and I understood him in the way that any Western man would understand that statement. I thought he meant that I was somehow void of determination, will, purpose, or even intelligence, but he had never spoken to me about a hole in my body. There is a hole on the right side, she said, matter-of-factly, a hole that a woman made when she emptied you. Would you know who the woman is? Only you can tell that, the narwhal said that men, most of the time, cannot tell who had emptied them. Women are more fortunate. They know for a fact who emptied them. Are your sisters empty like me? Don't be stupid. How can they be empty? Donna Soledad said that she was empty. Does she look like me? No, the hole in her stomach was enormous. It was on both sides, which meant that a man and a woman had emptied her. What did Donna Soledad do with the man and a woman? She gave her completeness to them. I vacillated for a moment before asking the next question. I wanted to assess all the implications of her statement. Donna LaGuardia was even worse than Soledad, Lydia went on. 2 women emptied her. The hole in her stomach was like a cavern, but now she has closed it. She is complete again. Tell me about those 2 women. I can't tell you anything more, she said in the most imperative tone. Only LaGuardia can speak to you about those matters. Wait until she comes. Why only LaGuardia? Because she knows everything. Is she the Is she the only one who knows everything? The witness knows as much, maybe even more. But he is Gennaro himself, and that makes him very difficult to handle. We don't like him. Why don't you like him? Those 3 bums are awful. They are crazy like Gennaro. Well, they are Gennaro himself. They are always fighting us because they were afraid of the Narwhal, and now they are taking their revenge on us. That's what LaGuardia says anyways. What makes LaGuardia say that? The Narwhal told her things he didn't tell the rest of us. She sees. The Narwhal said that you also see. Josephina and I don't see. Yet all 5 of us are the same. We are the same. The phrase, we are the same, which Donna Soledad had used the night before, brought out an avalanche of thoughts and fears. I put my writing pad down. I looked around. I was in a strange world, lying in a strange bed in between 2 young women I did not know, and yet I felt at ease there. My body experienced abandon and indifference. I trusted them. Are you going to sleep here? I asked her. What else? How about your own room? I can't leave you alone. We feel the same way you do. You are a stranger, except that we are bound to help you. LaGuardia said that no matter how stupid you are, we have to look after you. She said we have to sleep in the same bed with you as if you were the Narwhal himself. Lydia turned off the lantern. I remained sitting with my back against the wall. I closed my eyes to think, and I fell asleep instantly. Lydia and Rosa and I had been sitting in a flat area just outside the front room for nearly 2 hours, since 8 o'clock in the morning. I had tried to steer them into a conversation, but they refused to talk. They seemed to be very relaxed, almost asleep. Their mood of abandonment was not contagious, however. Sitting there in that forced silence had put me in a mood of my own. Their house sat on top of a small hill. The front door faced the east. From where I sat, I could see almost the entire narrow valley that ran from east to west. I could not see the town, but I could see the green areas of cultivated fields on the floor of the valley. On the other side, flanking the valley in every direction, there were gigantic round eroded hills. There were no high mountains in the vicinity of the valley, only those enormous eroded round hills, the sight of which created in me a most intense feeling of oppression. I had the sensation that those hills were about to transport me into another time. Lydia spoke to me all of a sudden, and her voice disrupted my reverie. She pulled my sleeve. "Here comes Josephina," she said. I looked at the winding trail that led from the valley to the house. I saw a woman walking slowly up the trail, perhaps 50 yards away. I noticed immediately the remarkable difference in age between Lydia and Rosa and the approaching women. I looked at her again. I had never thought Josephina to be that old. Judging by her slow gait and the posture of her body, she seemed to be a woman in her mid-50s. She was thin, wore a long dark skirt, and was carrying a load of firewood on her back. She had a bundle tied around her waist and looked as though she had a bundled up child riding on her left hip. She seemed to be breastfeeding as she walked. Her steps were almost feeble. She could barely make the last steep slope before reaching the house. When she finally stood in front of us a few yards away, she was panting so heavily I had attempted to help her sit down. She made a gesture that seemed to say she was all right. I heard Lydia and Rosa giggle. and did not look up at them because my total attention had been taken by the assault. The women in front of me were absolutely the most disgusting foul. The woman in front of me was absolutely the most disgusting foul creature I had ever seen. She untied the bundle of firewood and dropped it on the floor with a loud clatter. I jumped involuntarily, due in part to the loud noise and in part to the fact that the woman nearly fell on my lap, pulled by the weight of the wood. She looked at me for an instant and then lowered her eyes, seemingly embarrassed by her clumsiness. She straightened her back and then sighed with an apparent relief. Obviously, the load had been too great for her whole body. As she stretched her arms, her hair fell partially loose. She was wearing a soiled headband tied over her forehead. Her hair was long and graying and seemed dirty and matted. I could see the white hairs against the dark brown of the headband. She smiled at me and sort of nodded her head. All her teeth seemed to be missing. I could see the black hole of her toothless mouth. She covered her face with her hand and laughed. She took off her sandals and walked into the house without giving me time to say anything. Rosa followed her. I was dumbfounded. Donna Soledad had implied that Josephina was the same age as Lydia and Rosa. I turned to Lydia, and she was peering at me. I had no idea she was that old, I said. Yes, she's pretty old, she said in a matter-of-fact tone. Does she have a child? Yes, she takes him everywhere. She never leaves him with us. She's afraid we're going to eat him. Is it a boy? A boy. How old is he? She's had him for some time. I don't know his age. We thought she shouldn't have a child at her age, but she didn't pay any attention to us. Whose child is he? Josephina's, of course. I mean, who's the father? The Nawal. Who else? I thought that development was quite extravagant and very unnerving. I suppose anything is possible in the Nawal world, I said. I meant it more as a thought to myself than a statement made to Lydia. You bet, she said, and laughed. The oppressiveness of those eroded hills became unbearable. There was something truly abhorrent about that area, and Josephina had been the final blow. On top of an ugly old smelly body and no teeth, she seemed to have some sort of facial paralysis. The muscles on the left side of her face appeared to be injured, a condition which created a most unpleasant distortion of her left eye and the left side of her mouth. My oppressive mood plummeted to one of sheer anguish. For an instant I toyed with the idea, so familiar by then, of running to my car and driving away. I complained to Lydia that I did not feel well. She laughed and said that Josephina had no doubt scared me. She has that effect on people, she said. Everybody hates her guts. She's uglier than a cockroach. I remember seeing her once, I said, but she was young. Things change, Lydia said philosophically. One way or another. Look at Soledad. What a change, huh? And you yourself have changed. You are more massive than I remember you. You are looking more and more like the Nawal. I wanted to say that the change in Josephina was abhorrent, but I was afraid that she might overhear me. I looked at the eroded hills across the valley. I felt like fleeing from them. The Nawal gave us this house, she said, but it is not a house for rest. We had another house before that was truly beautiful. This is a place to steam up. Those mountains over there will drive you nuts. Her boldness was reading my feelings, gave me a respite. I did not know what to say. We are all naturally lazy, she went on. We don't like to strain ourselves. The Nawal knew that, so we must have figured that this place would drive us up the walls. She stood up and abruptly said that she wanted something to eat. We went to the kitchen in a semi-enclosed area with only 2 walls. At the open end to the right of the door, there was an earthen stove. At the other end, where the 2 walls met, there was a large dining area with a long table and 3 benches. The floor was paved with smooth river rocks. The flat roof was about 10 feet high and was resting on the two walls and on the thick supporting beams on the open sides. Lydia poured me a bowl of beans and meat from a pot which cooked on a very low fire. She heated up some tortillas over the fire. Rosa came in and sat down next to me and asked Lydia to serve her some food. I became immersed in watching Lydia use a ladle to scoop beans and meat. She seemed to have an eye for an exact amount. She must have been aware that I was admiring her maneuvers. She took 2 or 3 beans from Rosa's bowl and returned them to the pot. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Josephina coming into the kitchen. I did not look at her, though. She sat facing me across the table. I had a squeamish feeling in my stomach. I felt that I could not eat with that woman looking at me. To ease my tension, I joked with Lydia that there were still 2 extra beans in Rosa's bowl that she had overlooked. She scooped up 2 beans with the ladle with a precision that made me gasp. I laughed nervously, knowing that once Lydia sat down, I would have to move my eyes from the stove and acknowledge the presence of Josephina. Finally, I reluctantly had to look across the table at Josephina. There was a dead silence. I stared at her incredulously. My mouth fell open. I heard the loud laughter of Lydia and Rosa. It took an endless moment for me to put my thoughts and feeling in some sort of order. Whoever was facing me was not Josephina, the Josephina I had seen just a while ago, but a pretty girl. She did not have Indian features as Lydia and Rosa did. She seemed to have more of a Latin than Indian. She had a light olive complexion, very small mouth, and finely chiseled nose, small white teeth, and short black curly hair. She had a dimple on the left side of her face, which gave her a cockiness in her smile. She was the girl I had met briefly years ago. She held my scrutiny. Her eyes were friendly. I became possessed by degrees with some uncontrollable nervousness. I ended up desperately clowning about my genuine bewilderment. They laughed like children. After the laughter had subsided, I wanted to know what was the point of Josephina's histrionic display. She's practicing the art of stalking, Lydia said. The narwhal taught us to baffle people so they wouldn't notice us. Josephina is very pretty, and if she walks alone at night, no one will bother her if she is ugly and smelly. But if she goes out as she really is, well, you yourself can tell what would happen. Josephina nodded affirmatively, and then contorted her face into the ugliest grimace possible. She can hold that face all day, Lydia said. I contended that if I lived around the area, I would certainly notice Josephina in her disguise more readily than if she did not have one. That disguise was just for you, Lydia said, and all 3 of them laughed. And look how it baffled you. You noticed her child even more than you noticed her. Lydia went into the room and brought back the package of rags that looked like a bundled up child and threw it on the table in front of me. I laughed uproariously with them. Do all of you have particular disguises, I asked. No, only Josephina. No one around here knows her as she really is, Lydia replied. Josephina nodded and smiled but she remained silent. I liked her tremendously, but there was something so very innocent and sweet about her. Say something, Josephina, I said, grabbing her by her forearms. She looked at me bewildered and recoiled. I thought that I had gotten carried away by my elation and perhaps grabbed her too hard. I let her go. She sat up straight. She contorted her small mouth, thin lips, and produced a most grotesque outburst of grunts and shrieks. Her whole body was... her whole face suddenly changed. A series of ugly, involuntary spasms marred her tranquil expression a moment before. I looked at her, horrified. Lydia pulled me by the sleeve. Why do you have to scare her, stupid, she whispered. Don't you know that she's become mute and can't talk at all? Josephina obviously understood her Josephina obviously understood her and seemed bent on protesting. She clenched her fist at Lydia and let out another burst of extremely loud and horrifying shrieks, and then choked and coughed. Rosa began to rub her back. Lydia tried to do the same, but Josephina nearly hit her in the face. Lydia sat down next to me and made a gesture of impotence. She shrugged her shoulders. She's that way, Lydia whispered to me. Josephina turned to her. Her face was contorted in the most ugly grimace of anger. She opened her mouth and bellowed at the top of her voice some more frightening guttural sounds. Lydia slid off the bench and in a most unobtrusive manner left the kitchen area. Rosa held Josephina by her arm. Josephina seemed to be the epitome of fury. She moved her mouth and contorted her face. In a matter of minutes, she had lost most of all her beauty and innocence that had enchanted me. I didn't know what to do. I tried to apologize, but Josephina's inhuman sounds drowned out my words. Finally, Rosa took her into the house. Lydia returned and sat across the table from me. Something went wrong up here, she said, touching her head. When did it happen, I asked. A long time ago. The narwhal must have done something to her, because all of a sudden she lost her speech. Lydia seemed sad. I had the impression that her sadness had showed against her desire. I even tempted to tell her not to struggle so hard to hide her emotions. How does Josephina communicate with you people, I asked. Does she write? Come on, don't be silly. She doesn't write. She's not you. She uses her hands and feet to tell us what she wants. Josephina and Rosa came back to the kitchen. They stood by my side. I thought that Josephina was again the picture of innocence and candor. Her beatific expression did not give the slightest inkling of the fact that she could become so ugly so fast. Looking at her, I had the sudden realization that her fabulous ability for gestures undoubtedly was intimately linked to her aphasia. I reasoned that the only person who had lost her capacity to verbalize could be so versed in mimicry. Rosa said to me that Josephina had confided that she wished she could talk because she liked me very much. Until you came, she was happy the way she was, Lydia said in a harsh voice. Josephina shook her head affirmatively, corroborating Lydia's statement, and went into a mild outburst of sounds. I wish LaGuardia was here, Rosa said. Lydia always gets Josephina angry. I don't mean to, Lydia protested. Josephina smiled at her and extended her arm to touch her. It seemed as if she were attempting to apologize. Lydia brushed her hand away. Why, you mute imbecile, she muttered. Josephina did not get angry. She looked away. There was so much sadness in her eyes that I did not want to look at her. I felt compelled to intercede. She thinks she's the only woman in the world who has problems, Lydia snapped at me. The narwhal told us to drive her hard and without mercy until she no longer feels sorry for herself. Lydia looked at me and reaffirmed Lydia's claim with a nod of her head. Lydia turned to Rosa and ordered her to leave Josephina's side. Rosa moved away compliantly and sat on the bench next to me. The narwhal said that one of these days she will talk again, Lydia said to me. Hey, Rosa said, pulling my sleeve. Maybe you're the one who'll make her talk. Yes, Lydia exclaimed as if she had the same thought. Maybe that's why we had to wait for you. It's so clear, Rosa added with an expression of having had a true revelation. Both of them jumped to their feet and embraced Josephina. You're going to talk again, Rosa explained as she took Josephina by the shoulders. Josephina opened her eyes and rolled them. She started making faint, muffled sighs, as if she was sobbing, and ended up running back and forth, crying like an animal. Her excitation was so great that she seemed to have locked her jaws open. I honestly thought that she was on the brink of a nervous breakdown. Lydia could not even hear what I was saying. Her eyes went out of focus, and I knew she was going to faint. Wait a minute, I missed the page here. I thought that didn't make sense. I honestly thought that she was on the brink of a nervous breakdown. Lydia and Rosa ran to her side and helped her close her mouth, but they did not try to calm her down. "You're going to talk again, you're going to talk again," they shouted. Josephina sobbed and howled in a manner that sent chills down my spine. I was absolutely confounded. I tried to talk sense to them. I appealed to their reason, but then I realized that they had very little of it, by my standards. I paced back and forth in front of them, trying to figure out what to do. "You are going to help me, aren't you?" Lydia demanded. "Please, sir, please," Rosa pleaded with me. I told them that they were crazy, that I could not possibly know what to do. And yet, as I talked, I noticed that there was a funny feeling of optimism and certainty in the back of my mind. I wanted to discard it at first, but it took hold of me. Once before I had a similar feeling in relation to a dear friend of mine who was mortally ill. I thought I could make her well and actually leave the hospital where she lay dying. I even consulted Don Juan about it. "Sure, you can cure her and make her walk out of that death trap," he said. "How?" I had asked him. "It's a very simple procedure," he said. "All you have to do is remind her that she's an incurable patient. Since she's a terminal case, she has power. She has nothing to lose anymore. She's lost everything already. When one has nothing to lose, one becomes courageous. We are timid only when there is something we can still cling to." "But is it enough to remind her of that?" "No, that will give her the boost she needs. Then she has to push the disease away with her left hand. She must push her arm out in front of her with her hand clenched as if she were holding on to a knob. She must push on and on as she says, out, out, out. Tell her that since she has nothing else to do, she must dedicate every second of her remaining life to performing that movement. I assure you that she can get up and walk away if she wants to." "It sounds so simple," I said. Don Juan chuckled. "It seems simple," he said, "but it isn't. In order to do this, your friend needs an impeccable spirit." He looked at me for a long while. He seemed to be measuring the concern and sadness I felt for my friend. "Of course," he added, "if your friend had an impeccable spirit, she wouldn't be there in the first place." I told my friend what Don Juan had said, but she was already too weak to even attempt to move her arm. In Josephina's case, my rationale for my secret confidence was the fact that she was a warrior with an impeccable spirit. Would it be possible? I silently asked myself to apply the same hand movement to her. I told Josephina that her incapacity to speak was due to some sort of blockage. Yes, it's a blockage," Lydia and Rosa explained. I explained to Josephina that the arm movement had told... I explained to Josephina the arm movement and told her that she had to push the blockage by moving her arm in that fashion. Josephina's eyes were transfixed. She seemed to be in a trance. She moved her mouth, making barely audible sounds. She tried moving her arm, but her excitation was so intense that she flung her arm without any coordination. I tried to redirect her movements, but she appeared to be so thoroughly befuddled that she could not even hear what I was saying. Her eyes went out of focus, and I knew she was going to faint. Rose apparently realized what was happening. She jumped away and grabbed a cup of water and sprinkled it over Josephina's face. Josephina's eyes rolled back, showing the whites of her eyes. She blinked repeatedly until she could focus her eyes again. She moved her mouth, but she made no sound. "Touch your throat, Rosa yelled at me. Wish somebody had touched my throat. No, Lydia shouted back. "Touch her head. It's in her head, you dummy." She grabbed my hand, and I reluctantly let her place it on Josephina's head. Josephina shivered, and little by little she let out a series of faint sounds. Somehow they seemed to me more melodious than the inhuman sounds she made before. Rosa also must have noticed the difference. "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" she said to me in a whisper. But whatever the difference might have been, Josephina let out another series of more grotesque than ever. When she quieted down, she sobbed for a moment and then entered into another state of euphoria. Lydia and Rosa finally quieted her. She plunked down on the bench, apparently exhausted. She could barely lift her eyelids to look at me. She smiled weakly. "I am so very, very sorry," I said, and held her hand. Her whole body vibrated. Her lower head began to weep. She lowered her head and began to weep again. I felt the surge of ultimate empathy for her. At that moment, I would have given my life to help her. She sobbed uncontrollably as she tried to speak to me. Lydia and Rosa appeared to be caught up in the drama that we were making the same gestures with their mouths. "For heaven's sake, do something," Rosa explained in a pleading voice. I experienced an unbearable anxiety. Josephina stood up and embraced me, or rather clung to me in a frenzy and pushed me away from the table. At that instant, Lydia and Rosa, with astounding agility and speed and control, grabbed me by the shoulders with both hands and at the same time hooked the heels of my feet with their feet. The weight of Josephina's body and her embrace, plus the speed of Lydia and Rosa's maneuver, rendered me helpless. They all moved at once, and before I knew what was happening, they had laid me on the floor with Josephina on top of me. I felt her heart pounding. She held on to me with great force. The sound of her heart reverberated in my ears. I felt the pounding in my own chest. I tried to push her away, but she held on fast. Rosa and Lydia had me pinned down on the floor with their weight on my arms and legs. Rosa cackled insanely and began nibbling on my side. Her small, sharp teeth chattered as her jaws snapped open and shut with nervous spasms. All at once I had a monstrous sensation of pain, physical revulsion, and terror. I lost my breath. My eyes could not focus. I knew that I was passing out. I heard then the dry, cracking sound of a pipe breaking at the base of my neck, and felt the ticklish sensation on the top of my head running like a shiver through my entire body. The next thing I knew, I was looking at them from the other side of the kitchen. The three girls were staring at me while they lay on the floor. "What are you doing?" I heard someone say in a loud, harsh, commanding voice. I then had the inconceivable feeling. I felt Josephina let go of me and stand up. I was lying on the floor, and yet I was also standing a distance away from them, looking at a woman I had never seen before. She was by the door. She walked toward me and stopped 6 or 7 feet away. She stared at me for a moment. I knew immediately that she was LaGorda. She demanded to know what was going on. "We were just playing a little joke on him," Josephina said, clearing her throat. "I was pretending to be mute." The three girls huddled up close together and began to laugh. LaGorda remained impassive, looking at me. They had tricked me. I found my stupidity and gullibility to be so outrageous that I had a fit of hysterical laughter, which was almost out of control. My body shivered. I knew that Josephina had not been playing, as she had claimed. The three of them had meant business. I had actually felt Josephina's body as a force that, in fact, was getting inside my body. Rosa's nibbling on my side, which undoubtedly was a ruse to distract my attention, coincided with the sensation I had had of Josephina's heart was pounding inside my chest. I heard LaGorda's urging me to calm down. I had a nervous flutter in my midsection, and then a quiet, calm anger swept over me. I loathed them. I had had enough of them. I would have picked up my jacket and writing pad and walked out of the house had it not been that I was not quite myself yet. I was somewhat dizzy, and my senses were definitely out of line. I had had the sensation that when I had first looked at the girls from across the room, I was actually viewing them from a position above my eye level, from a place close to the ceiling. But something even more disconcerting was that I had actually perceived that the ticklish sensation on the top of my head was what had scooped me from Josephina's embrace. It was not as if something came out of the top of my head. Something actually did come out from the top of my head. For a few years before, Don Juan and Gennaro had maneuvered my perception, and I had had an impossible double sensation. I had felt that Don Juan had fallen on top of me and pinned me to the ground, while at the same time I felt that I was standing up. I was actually in both places at once. In sorcerer's terms, I could say that my body had stored the memory of that double perception and seemed to have repeated it. There were, however, two new things that had been added to my bodily memory this time. One was the ticklish sensation I had become so aware of during the course of my confrontations with those women was the vehicle to arriving at the double perception. And the other was that the sound at the base of my neck let loose something in me that was capable of coming out of the top of my head. After a minute or two, I definitely felt that I was coming down from near the ceiling until I was standing on the floor. It took a while for my eyes to adjust to seeing at my normal eye level. As I looked at the four women, I felt naked and vulnerable. I then had an instant of disassociation or lack of perceptual continuity. It was as if I had shut my eyes and some force suddenly had made me twirl a couple of times. When I opened my eyes, the girls were staring at me with their mouths open. But somehow, I was myself again. End of the second chapter.